Thank you once again. Thank you for having me.
All right, great. Let's move on now to our next story. Despite a Supreme Court ruling granting financial autonomy to Nigeria's 774 local government councils, the Federation Accounts Allocation Committee, FAC, disbursed 2.08 trillion naira to local government councils between July and December 2024, reportedly through state governments still. Now, during the 6-month period, LGC allocations rose by 72.06% compared to the same time frame in 2023. December 2024 recorded the highest allocation, with LGCs receiving 402.5 billion naira, a 13.2% increase from November. Despite the increased funding, the funds continue to be managed by state governments, undermining the autonomy granted by the court.
This has sparked protests from the Association of Local Governments of Nigeria, ALGON, and the National Union of Local Government Employees, NULGE, accusing state governments of withholding local government funds. The July 2024 Supreme Court judgment mandated direct payment of local government council allocations to their accounts to ensure autonomy. However, nearly 6 months later, the federal government has yet to implement the directive, citing practical impediments. Joining us to discuss the implications of this delay is partner and tax leader at KPMG Nigeria, Wale Ajayi. Good morning. Thank you for your time with us.
Happy to be here.
All right. First of all, I think maybe, I don't know if you get a sense of what practical impediments might mean as to why the Supreme Court's judgment has not yet been carried out 6 months later, and if that's excuse enough as to why this hasn't yet been carried out.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. I think the problem we have in Nigeria is that when we have a problem and we try to solve it without going through the proper means, we're going to end up the same way we've ended up with the local government's autonomy. What the Supreme Court has tried to do with the judgment that was given in July of this year was that they felt that, well, the state governments were not allocating the money that was meant for local governments to them. So maybe the best way to go about it is to then direct that the money should be given straight to local government. Unfortunately, that goes against the Constitution itself. And and it is interesting, if you all recall, that in 2004, when the current president was the governor of Lagos State, and he created some local government, the then president, Obasanjo, decided to withdraw the allocation to local government, to state government. And the Lagos State government went to court and they won. And then in 2022, Buhari then directed the Accountant General, right, not to pay straight to local government. And the Supreme Court even reversed that rule. So the question is, what exactly does the law say? I mean, we understand what the Supreme Court is trying to do, but we've got to go back to the Constitution, right? When you look at the Constitution, there are 3 specific provisions in the Constitution that make the implementation of the Supreme Court invalid or unenforceable. The first one, all right, there's a provision that says, any money that is due to local government must be allocated to the state government for the credit of their local government. That is one. Then number 2, there's a provision that says the state and local government must create a joint account, right, to be managed by the state, right, for which all the money that is due to local government from the Federation account and from the state accounts should be credited to. Then number 3, there is a provision that then says that the state would then allocate the money that it receives on behalf of local government to them as may be determined by the State National Assembly. So those are 3 provisions that the Constitution says that state government must manage the money. So the question is, right, even though we know that state government is not allocating the money to state government, is that the best way to cure it? No, that's not the best way. We need to look at how we can force state government. Giving a judgment that is not enforceable is an issue. That is one. The other thing I must say is that when you look at the way the state and local governments work together, right? The state typically, build all the schools, the healthcare in the state, in the area of jurisdiction, right? And they pay the teachers, they pay the health workers, right? And then if you're then asking federal government to pay straight, to the local government, how would those people earn their salary? But the bigger issue for me is more of the Constitution, and that is why the Supreme Court judgment is going to be difficult, to enforce. Yes, you might even give the states the financial autonomy they need, but remember that they're still under local government and under the state government, and the state governor are the ones that will always pick the local government. So they may have financial autonomy, but then the question is administrative and political autonomy still lies, with the state government. So that's really the issue.
Well, it seems like we have a lot to battle with here. I mean, thanks for breaking it down to making it so seamless, especially for our viewers. I'm sure everyone now gets what the law says, and now we can understand what the battle is. But a few months back, when this was passed, I mean, talking about in July 2024, earlier in the middle of this year, sometime around October, just a few months ago, we did see some governors get excited and say, yes, they were willing to work with it. So it seems there's a divide. And this divide is quite understandable with your explanation. But do you think that the federal government should actually push further? Or do you think that we need to revisit the law and work at it from the law before we look at implementation again?
I think we got to look at the Constitution and then change the Constitution for us to be able to implement this. That is the practical impediment to the enforcement of the Supreme Court judgment. I mean, everybody understands what the Supreme Court, again, is trying to do, right? But you don't cure a problem by creating another problem. You're basically saying because the states are not doing what they're meant to do, then you will go out of your way and direct the state. What that means is that Supreme Court itself is making law, and they're not meant to make law. They're meant to interpret the law. Now, the only way out really, has to be an amendment of the Constitution. We do understand, or we may even say to ourselves, what is the problem? The states are not allocating the money that belongs to to local government. How can we get the state to do this, right? That is the question we need to be asking ourselves. Right. Yes, I mean, I understand why some state governors are saying, well, they're willing to, to comply with the Supreme Court judgment. But the question is, they will tell you also that their hands are tied, right? Even though they're willing, but the Constitution says something that is different. So I can't go against the Constitution. So that's the problem. So we've got to have a situation where all the stakeholders have to come together and see how we can deal with the problem. Let's address the root cause. What we're trying to do goes against the Constitution. And that is why, everybody can rejoice since July, but nobody is going to enforce it because there's just no way they can enforce it. The Constitution mandates the creation of a state joint account with local government, and that money has to be paid into that account. So all stakeholders have to come together and find a way, to address the root cause, why the state governors are not allocating the money that is meant for local government to them.
All right. I mean, you've said at the end of the day, the major issue, like we're literally putting the cart before the horse by saying that we want to implement it, whereas the Constitution has a different provision and we need to revisit the provision of the Constitution. But let's assume, that that's a conversation that's in the works, the revisiting of the Constitution. Look, let's walk us through, from your perspective, what the implications will be of the local government having direct access to these funds as opposed to having a joint account with the state. There are those who fear that the local government may not be able to manage the resources adequately and that it's imperative that the state is involved in the management of these resources. Is that a concern that you share?
Now, I will push back against that argument. Why? Even the state governments have not been able to manage the money also they received. So I won't say that is an issue. Right? I think the way to look at it is what are we trying to do? We're trying to make our local governments to be viable. Our local governments are the nearest source of government, to the people, right? And so you need to ensure that they have the money. They need to be able to carry out what they're supposed to do. But the problem is they are hamstrung because the state governors have sat on the money and they decide, who they're going to give the money to. Remember that they also even appoint, even though they're elected. But we know what typically happens in all the states, that they appoint the local government chairman, they appoint the councillor. So I won't be worried. Let's give them the money. Let's have governance, strengthen governance. Well, any local government that does not, then use the money judiciously, then we can find a way around it. It's the same argument we have with state. It's the state argument we have with federal government. States have been given money. How many of the states have used the money judiciously? I mean, that's the question. So we can't turn around and say, well, if we give the money to local government, we're not sure they're going to manage it well. Let's give them the money first and then we'll see what we can do. But we need to put guardrails in place to ensure that there's transparency in the use of the money, and that, of course, the money is used for the purpose for which it should be used for.
Are there
So I won't worry
suggestions?
so much about that.
I mean, that's a valid point you raised there in terms of putting guardrails. But what do you think the picture of guardrails will look like? How do we ensure this transparency and accountability, and to ensure that we don't have a mismanagement of resources that we see on the state level?
The way I look at it is that I think we've got to find a way to grant not just financial autonomy to local governments. We need to also grant political autonomy, right, and administrative autonomy. Each state, each local government must be free to run, its local government, as the
It will seem that there's some
government.
All right.
They don't have problem, right? They're able to manage it. So, so the local government should be given the opportunity to define their rules, the governance process, and everybody within the local government, they must need to pay attention that, well, local government, now you have the freedom that you want, whether it's financial, political, or everything. Let's see you build infrastructure. Let's see you provide all the things that we need for the benefit of the people in that area.
When you talk about political autonomy, does that also include the ability for them to conduct their own elections?
Well, they should have the ability to conduct. Even if they don't conduct the election, there shouldn't be any interference from the states, right? Because under the constitution that we have now, is the states that conducts election, for local government, through the state INEC, right? But what is happening is that anytime you see an election in any local government, right, or in any state in Nigeria, what you find out is that the willing party always wins all the seats in that state. It's always the case. It has never been an exception. So we've got to find a way whereby we can shield the way local government does its things from the state. Even if the state conducts election, but there has to be some level of independence, right? Each local government must be able to choose the people. But unfortunately, this is Nigeria, where we kowtow to political godfathers, and the godfathers then choose who will be the chairman, who will be the councillors. So it's going to require a change management, a change of mindset for us to see it, the way it should actually play out. And of course, we don't need to go very far. We can always take lessons, leverage lessons from successful countries that also have local governments, and we don't have this issue. UK is an example, right? And this issue is not there, but we need to change our mindset.
Do you finally, like you said, we've seen the successful economies, successful countries, UK, United States, Germany, and the likes, who actually have this autonomy. But then again, do you think that the current crop, or let's say the current politicians that we have, would want to let go? Because many have said that it seems like if the autonomy kicks in, it will no longer be a case of having a puppet on a string. In other words, the governors will no longer have control of what happens in these local governments. Do you think the politicians would be willing to let go?
I don't think it's a question of whether the politicians will be willing to let go. I think it's a question of what we, the people, want, right? We people have to define what exactly we want. It's not for the politician. I think what has happened in Nigeria is that because people are vulnerable, people have not eaten, people are suffering, the standard of living is so poor, the cost of living is so high. So people don't show interest, in things like this, where they should show interest. And because they've not shown interest, and so you've seen that the politicians have had a free field to do whatever they want. I think it's high time that we, the people, started showing attention and paying attention to how we are governed and looking at the governance process. It's not the politicians. We have the freedom. We know every 4 years, right? We have the power, to change if the politicians do not live up to a mandate, right? But the question is, because people are so poor, they just don't care. What they're bothered about is how they're going to feed, how they're going to eat lunch, how they're going to eat breakfast, how they're going to eat dinner. So they're not bothered. They don't see how this political process affects them. So that's the issue. So we are the ones that need to change, not so much as the politicians.
All right. It's been a very fruitful conversation with you. Thank you so much for speaking with us. I'm Mr. Wale Ajayi, and want to thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.